KMR. Welcome back. We're talking more BRAP. So continuing to look at the Bridgeport we were talking about the other day, and this is based off of the Cosmo turbo side plates, 13B side plates, which are similar to the 20B and in a lot of ways similar to the FD3S. So wanting to talk about what our goals are and a little bit of why we use these components just a little bit further, and figured we'd take a look at it before this motor goes together. So what we have going on here is a larger Bridgeport than we offer generally on our templates. You can see it's opening up substantially earlier than OEM, and we've done a decent sized street port. So we've increased not only the total volume substantially, but the intake opening timing substantially. And we ended up going with the Cosmo plates because they've got a couple advantages. They're available new from the factory still, so we're able to get those from Mazdatrix, and this is a collaboration project with Mazdatrix. And then we were also able to then run the turbo rotor housings, which give us the nice turbo sleeve. It starts off with a bigger exhaust port, so there's less porting work, and they've got some advantages when it comes to the internal cutting in the cooling passages. Meaning, as the rotary engineers engineered the motor later in its lineage, the later model motors had advantages. The casting material and port shape is larger from the factory, allowing us to actually cut the port bigger than the traditional early 4-port motors. And depending on how you see it, with the water O-rings in the cast iron plates, it allowed us to jump to those later model rotor housings, which I think also have some advantages. So when it came time to look at the idea of doing a naturally aspirated GT race motor or GT Bridgeport, instead of trying to use the older traditional components and obviously staying within the rules of the series that this motor is going in, we looked at all available options. And it just seemed like a better idea to use off-the-shelf parts that are currently available, and take advantage of the modern engineering of the rotary engine. And yes, obviously the Cosmo or FD3S is not as new as the Renesis, but the Renesis does not lend itself to this style of motor, nor was it legal in the category of racing this motor is being put into. So we considered all options and liked what we were able to do here. The increased volume, traditional port design, and a lot of advantages to the modern parts, including availability and production standards. So it's kind of a neat project, and this is going to be going on the Mazdatrix dyno, and we will get some numbers. And so that'll be kind of neat to look at what this modernized GT style Bridgeport does in comparison to those earlier GT Bridgeports. And there's a large variety of port combinations, intake combinations. So we're not expecting to break the records right out of the box, but we're expecting some good numbers, and we're expecting good reliability. With the water O-rings still in the cast iron plate, we should be able to seal that up fairly well, even though there is that missing segment, which is the traditional style or traditional way of doing a Bridgeport. And I think it's interesting because you start to look at all the modern Bridgeports, and I sell a porting template for one of these modern Bridgeports that does not cut the water seal, and that lends itself so much better to pressurized motors like boosted motors, supercharged motors. And so a lot of that also comes to the necessity of reliability. But when you're talking about a road race motor, specific purpose built, the car's lightweight, it's got a sequential gearbox, pretty aggressive rear end ratio. So we know this particular motor is going to be used in the mid to upper high RPM range. There will be no low end shifting. This motor and car will always be in the upper end of its RPM range, so it's okay that we have that aggressive port timing. I will also say that we did not go as aggressive as we could go. There is material on the table here. There's porting on the table. We could go bigger on the exhaust, but we went with something we know works, kind of a traditional shape, rounded edges versus square. Square might gain us a couple horsepower, but we wanted the apex seal to be able to glide over that exhaust port smoothly, and the ovaled radiuses versus the square shape is a little bit easier on the apex seal, and it also is a nice way to enhance velocity, basically squeezing the air as the port shuts versus just chopping it off. But if you look into traditional Mazda road racing, the square exhaust port often made slightly more power on the top end, but was a little bit more harmful to the apex seals. So with all of those things considered, we didn't want to go too aggressive on the exhaust. We wanted to consider apex seal longevity. It is a ceramic seal motor. And then same thing on the intake port side. We know we're leaving a little bit here on the bridge. We could have got a little more aggressive, but we know we have a lot of volume and we have a limit to our induction size. So there's really no point in going too big too soon. If we decide we need a little bit more port opening, or we need to increase the overall volume on either side, we've got some material left. And this is something I've learned in the past, is especially when it comes to brand new parts, brand new race motors, it's never the best idea to go big or go home on the first port job, unless you've got multiple motors you're playing with. But in this case, we wanted to start off with some very close to traditional shapes, knowing we've got a little bit more to go if we need it, and utilizing an exhaust port that we've ran in the past that has given us good mid-range and upper high RPM numbers, not only going for just high RPM numbers. All right, so I think that's a wrap. I always like talking about this stuff. This motor's going together very quickly. It's got deadlines, and a lot of the times I would just pass over this stuff in the necessity of getting everything done. But if you've noticed, I've really tried to increase the amount of stuff we talk about on the channel, because a lot of this stuff is unique in its own way, and once it's gone, we may not have the opportunity to talk about it again. So that's a wrap. Cosmo-based 13B GT style Bridgeport for naturally aspirated GT road racing. Thank you, Mazda Tricks. Make sure to follow KMR.